Life never moves in a straight line. There is always something in the way, something that slows you down, challenges you, or tests who you really are. The obstacle is the way shows how these moments aren't roadblocks but turning points, how perception, action, and inner strength can transform any struggle into growth. This video takes you through that journey, one idea at a time, so you can face your obstacles with clarity, courage, and purpose. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Discipline of Perception, opens by reminding us that the way we see the world is often more powerful than the world itself. This chapter dives into the idea that every obstacle carries two sides, what it appears to be, and what it can become if we learn to see it clearly. Before any action or strategy, perception is the internal lens that shapes everything. If the lens is anxious, we panic. If the lens is disciplined, we stay steady even in chaos. The chapter explains that life rarely waits for perfect conditions. Problems come with noise, pressure, and emotion. But we always have a tiny space between what happens and how we interpret it. Inside that space lives our real power. When we train ourselves to pause, to breathe, and to examine events without immediately reacting, we start seeing the obstacle differently. It becomes less of a threat and more of a situation to understand. A disciplined mind notices facts without exaggeration. It recognizes fear but doesn't let fear drive. Challenges might still feel heavy, but they lose the power to overwhelm because we no longer add unnecessary drama. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm but seeing the storm for what it is instead of imagining it will swallow the entire sky. That is the heart of disciplined perception. This chapter also explores how people throughout history faced impossible odds and still managed to stay calm. Their secret wasn't superhuman strength. It was clarity. They learned to look directly at reality instead of getting lost in emotional fog. They understood that panic shrinks our world, while clarity expands it. When the mind stays clear, the obstacle stops being a wall and starts acting like a doorway. In your everyday life, this chapter invites you to slow down the instant your mind races. Notice what is actually happening and separate it from the story your emotions want to tell. Treat the challenge like a puzzle instead of a threat. Ask yourself what the situation truly is, not what you fear it might be. When something disrupts your plans, practice returning to the present moment instead of spiraling into imagined disasters. And whenever you feel overwhelmed, remind yourself that clear perception doesn't remove difficulty, it simply gives you a fair chance to respond wisely. As this opening chapter ends, it prepares you for what comes next, learning to recognize the strength you already carry inside, waiting to be used. Chapter 2, Recognize Your Power, continues building the foundation by shifting your attention from the obstacle itself to the abilities you often forget you have. This chapter highlights a simple truth: the world can take away many things, but it cannot take away your ability to choose how you respond. Even when circumstances feel heavy or unfair, there is always something you control, even if it's only your attitude, your effort, or the meaning you attach to the situation. The chapter explains that most people underestimate this inner power because they measure their strength by what they can change outside themselves. When the outside world refuses to bend, they assume they are powerless. But real strength begins inside, where your perspective, patience, and choices live. When you shift your focus to what is still in your hands, you discover that you are never as trapped as you feel. Imagine being in a room where the door seems locked, but then you notice the key was in your pocket the entire time. That is the essence of this chapter. The obstacle is not the closed door, it is the belief that you have none of the tools needed to open it. Once you recognize what remains under your control, your judgment, your actions, your direction, the obstacle changes shape. It becomes less of a prison and more of a challenge that invites you to use your strengths deliberately. This chapter also reminds you that people throughout history have faced moments where external events were impossible to influence. Yet they still found a way forward because they leaned on the parts of themselves that no one could restrict. Calmness, courage, honesty, determination, these are not granted by luck, they are chosen. And those choices matter far more than the obstacle itself. In your daily life, the message is to stop giving so much attention to what you cannot fix and start noticing what you can influence right now. When something goes wrong, pause and ask yourself what part of the situation is yours to shape. Instead of replaying the unfairness, direct your energy toward the next meaningful step you can take. Whenever you feel stuck, remind yourself that your reactions are always yours to command, no matter how chaotic the outside world becomes. As this chapter comes to a close, it naturally leads into the next lesson, learning how to steady your nerves when pressure rises and fear tries to take the wheel. Chapter 3, Steady Your Nerves, steps deeper into the inner work required to face obstacles with strength. This chapter focuses on the pressure that comes when life surprises us, when events feel bigger than our ability to handle them. In moments like these, the mind naturally tenses. The heartbeat rises, the imagination jumps to worst-case scenarios, and every small detail begins to look like a threat. But this chapter teaches that the key to navigating difficulty is not eliminating stress, it's learning to stay grounded in the middle of it. The chapter explains that fear is not the real problem. Everyone feels fear. What matters is whether fear drives your decisions. When nerves take control, they blur judgment and shrink your ability to think clearly. But when you learn to steady yourself, to slow your breathing, quiet the panic, and remind your mind that you are still capable, you regain the ability to see the obstacle with clarity instead of distortion. There's a powerful idea here: obstacles often look more dangerous than they truly are because our nervous system magnifies the threat. The mind adds extra weight to the situation, making it seem heavier than reality. But once you steady your nerves, the problem becomes manageable again. Calmness doesn't magically fix everything, but it stops small problems from turning into emotional earthquakes. The chapter also reflects on how people under extreme pressure, soldiers, leaders, explorers, innovators, train themselves to remain steady not because they are emotionless, but because they understand that panic is expensive. When the mind spirals, opportunities disappear. When the mind steadies itself, solutions become visible. Staying calm is not a luxury, it is a survival tool. In everyday life, this lesson invites you to create a habit of grounding yourself whenever tension rises. When something unexpected happens, pause before reacting. Take a slow breath and give your body a moment to settle. When your nerves start telling wild stories, remind yourself that fear is a signal, not a master. Stay present in the moment instead of jumping into imagined future disasters. And whenever you feel yourself tightening up, return to your center, your ability to choose steady action over emotional chaos. As this chapter settles, it leads naturally into the next step of the journey, learning to control your emotions so they serve you rather than sabotage you. Chapter 4, Control Your Emotions, turns to one of the most challenging parts of facing obstacles, the inner storm of feelings that try to take over when things go wrong. This chapter makes something very clear: emotions aren't the enemy. They are natural, human, and often useful. But when they grow too loud, they distort reality and push us toward impulsive reactions that make difficult situations even harder. The goal isn't to silence emotions but to guide them so they don't guide you. The chapter explains that obstacles often trigger emotional responses before logical thinking has a chance to speak. A setback might sting with frustration. A sudden problem might spark anger or fear. A personal failure might bring embarrassment or self-doubt. These reactions are understandable, but they don't have to define what happens next. The real strength lies in creating enough space between feeling and action so you can respond intentionally instead of exploding, shutting down, or retreating. Imagine your emotions like a strong river. If you jump into the middle of the current without preparation, it sweeps you away. But if you learn how to watch the flow, how to step in with balance, and how to move deliberately, the same river becomes a path instead of a danger. The chapter encourages this kind of emotional discipline, not suppression but self-command. History is full of people who overcame overwhelming odds not because they were emotionless, but because they refused to let temporary feelings dictate long-term choices. They treated emotions like weather, they noticed them, acknowledged them, and then acted according to reason rather than storms. In daily life, this lesson invites you to slow down when emotions start rising. When anger flares, pause before speaking. When fear tightens your chest, remind yourself to breathe and observe the feeling instead of obeying it. When discouragement appears, treat it like a visitor instead of a permanent truth. Shift your attention toward what needs to be done rather than how you feel about doing it. And whenever you feel pushed by emotion, gently pull yourself back toward clarity. As the chapter comes to a close, it prepares you for an even deeper form of perception, learning how to practice true objectivity, seeing events without distortion and separating truth from the stories we imagine. Chapter 5, Practice Objectivity, invites you into one of the most liberating skills you can develop when dealing with obstacles, the ability to see things as they truly are, without the fog of ego, fear, or assumptions. This chapter reminds you that most problems feel worse not because of the facts, but because of the stories we attach to those facts. When we strip away exaggeration and emotion, the obstacle becomes clearer, smaller, and far more workable. Objectivity means stepping outside yourself for a moment, almost like watching your own situation through a clean window. Instead of thinking, "This is a disaster," you look at what is actually happening: a challenge, a delay, a setback, a change, a mistake. Nothing more. Nothing less. When the mind stops adding dramatic labels, the problem loses its power to crush you. The chapter explains that objectivity isn't cold or robotic. It is simply honest. It allows you to see the difference between what is happening and what you fear is happening. Between what the situation demands and what your feelings want to shout. Between what you control and what you don't. Most people never make these distinctions, so they get pulled around by distorted impressions rather than reality. Think of it like cleaning a lens. When the lens is dirty with frustration, insecurity, or impatience, everything looks blurry and threatening. But once the lens clears, you start noticing details you missed before, possibilities, solutions, angles of approach. A messy situation begins to look like a puzzle with pieces you can arrange. The chapter also points out that the greatest thinkers and leaders didn't succeed because they had easy lives. They succeeded because they practiced the discipline of looking at situations with clarity. They refused to let their imagination exaggerate threats or minimize their ability to handle them. Their power came from seeing things plainly, which gave them the freedom to act wisely. In your own life, this means catching yourself when you start spiraling into assumptions or emotional conclusions. Try describing the situation to yourself like an outside observer would, using simple and neutral words. Remind yourself that obstacles don't grow or shrink based on the facts, they grow or shrink based on your interpretation of those facts. When something goes wrong, look for the actual problem, not the imagined disaster. And whenever your emotions try to decorate the situation with fear, step back and let the dust settle before making any decisions. As this chapter closes, it naturally leads into the next lesson, shifting your perspective even further, learning to see obstacles not just accurately, but from angles you may never have considered before. Chapter 6, titled Alter Your Perspective, explores a quiet superpower that most people forget they have. It's the ability to step back from a situation and see it through a different lens. Obstacles often appear terrifying or impossible not because they truly are, but because we are standing too close to them. When you shift your point of view, the threat changes shape, and something that once felt overwhelming turns into a challenge you can actually work with. The chapter begins by reminding us that most problems are made worse by the story we tell ourselves about them. A setback becomes a catastrophe, a delay becomes a failure, a difficult person becomes an enemy. When your mind locks onto a single interpretation, you lose your freedom to respond calmly. But the moment you decide to look again, slightly from the side, slightly above, slightly detached, the emotional charge weakens. You begin to notice options you couldn't see when panic was in control. There is a kind of mental flexibility that separates people who crumble from people who adapt. Instead of asking why this is happening, this mindset asks what else this moment could mean. Instead of focusing on what is lost, it searches for what might be gained. Even the harshest moment can be reframed as training, as information, or as a small piece of something larger that you haven't fully understood yet. In your own life, you can practice this by pausing before reacting and imagining the challenge from a wider angle. Picture how it will look a week from now, a year from now, or from the point of view of someone who believes in your potential. Try interpreting the obstacle as a chance to sharpen a skill or strengthen your patience. When you approach life this way, you gradually train your mind to respond with clarity instead of fear. As we move on, the next chapter continues building this inner discipline, helping you see how much of your strength comes from the way you choose to think. Chapter 7, titled Is It Up to You, turns the spotlight onto a simple but life-shaping question. Every obstacle has two sides, the part you control and the part you don't. The trouble begins when these two get tangled. People waste unbelievable amounts of energy trying to bend reality, change other people, or fight circumstances that were never theirs to command. This chapter reminds us that clarity begins the moment we separate what is ours from what isn't. The heart of the lesson is that responsibility is not about taking blame for everything. It's about focusing your effort on the small circle of things that truly belong to you, your attitude, your choices, your preparation, your persistence. Even when a situation feels unfair or overwhelming, there is always at least one piece you can influence. That piece is where your power lives. Everything outside that circle, luck, timing, opinions, external chaos, is noise you must learn to ignore. When you decide to work only with what you control, a strange calmness appears. Anxiety fades because you're no longer trying to fight the wind. Confidence rises because your attention is placed on actions you can actually take. You stop arguing with reality and start using reality as material to build with. This mindset doesn't magically remove obstacles, but it transforms your posture toward them. You become someone who responds instead of someone who reacts. You can bring this into your life by asking yourself a quiet question whenever a challenge hits: what part of this is truly mine to handle? Then commit all your energy to that part, and release the rest. Over time, this becomes a habit that shields your mind from unnecessary stress and strengthens your sense of agency. The next chapter continues refining this discipline, showing how presence, not panic, turns obstacles into something you can work with. Chapter 8, titled Live in the Present Moment, brings us to a discipline that sounds simple but demands real courage. It's the art of staying with what is directly in front of you, instead of getting pulled into memories of what should have happened or fears of what might happen next. Obstacles often feel heavier because the mind drags in extra weight, old disappointments, imagined disasters, worst-case scenarios. This chapter reminds us that the only place you can actually move, decide, and change things is the present moment. The idea is not to ignore the future or pretend the past never happened. It's to stop letting them steal your attention when you need your strength the most. When you're fully here, your senses sharpen and your thinking clears. Even a complicated challenge breaks down into small, workable pieces. Instead of drowning in everything at once, you can give your full focus to the single step that matters right now. People often freeze because they're trying to solve the entire situation in their head before taking action. But life rarely moves in giant leaps. It moves in small, steady movements, one task, one phone call, one decision, one conversation at a time. When you commit to handling what is right in front of you, the obstacle becomes less intimidating because you've stopped fighting the whole mountain and started climbing one foothold at a time. In your own life, try grounding yourself by noticing the exact moment you are in. Bring your attention back to the task that is actually in your hands. Handle the next small action, then the next one after that. Bit by bit, the pressure loosens and clarity grows. As we continue, the next chapter explores how thinking differently can unlock pathways that were hidden by fear and assumptions. Chapter 9, titled Think Differently, invites you to break away from the mental autopilot that most people live on. Obstacles often feel fixed and unchangeable because we approach them with the same thoughts, the same habits, and the same assumptions we've always used. This chapter shows that progress begins the moment you allow your mind to roam beyond the usual boundaries. When you challenge the patterns that have limited you, the problem itself begins to shift. The idea is not to force creativity or chase some dramatic breakthrough. It's simply to give yourself permission to question the obvious. Many people accept difficulties as they appear on the surface, never imagining there might be another angle, another strategy, or a quieter path around the barrier. Thinking differently doesn't mean being unrealistic. It means being willing to explore possibilities that aren't immediately visible when fear or frustration is leading the conversation in your head. There is a kind of boldness required in this mindset. You have to be willing to let go of old rules, outdated expectations, and the belief that there is only one correct way to approach a situation. When you loosen your mental grip, new routes begin to appear, routes that were hidden simply because you never looked for them. This flexibility is part courage and part curiosity, and it grows stronger each time you practice it. In your own life, you can apply this by gently questioning your first reaction to a challenge. Instead of assuming the obvious path is the only one, pause and explore alternatives. Try imagining how someone with a completely different background might approach your situation. Let your mind roam past the expected solution and see what else emerges. Often, the breakthrough is waiting just outside your usual way of thinking. As we move forward, the next chapter opens a new phase of the book, shifting from how you see obstacles to how you take action against them. Chapter 10, titled The Discipline of Action, marks the book's shift from how you see obstacles to what you actually do about them. Perception shapes your understanding, but action is what transforms that understanding into momentum. This chapter reminds us that no amount of clarity or insight matters unless it's paired with movement. Even small, imperfect steps carry more weight than endless planning inside your head. The message here is that effective action isn't about dramatic heroism or sudden genius. It's about steady, consistent work, showing up again and again, even when the situation feels dull, frustrating, or uncertain. Many people hesitate because they wait for perfect timing, perfect confidence, or perfect conditions. But obstacles rarely give you that luxury. They demand that you begin where you are, with what you have, even if your first step feels small or clumsy. There is a kind of humility in this discipline. You stop worrying about how impressive your efforts look and start focusing on making real progress. Action becomes a way of thinking with your hands rather than endlessly debating with your fears. Each step you take teaches you something new, and that information becomes fuel for the next move. Slowly, the obstacle that once felt immovable begins to respond to your persistence. In your own life, you can practice this by choosing one meaningful action and doing it without negotiating with your doubts. Break your challenge into a simple first step, complete it, and let movement create its own momentum. Once you begin, hesitation loses its grip, and clarity grows with every bit of progress you make. The next chapter builds on this idea, showing how getting started is only the beginning. Staying in motion requires persistence and resilience. Chapter 11, Follow the Process, builds on a simple but often ignored truth: progress rarely arrives in dramatic leaps. It grows out of small steps repeated with patience, especially when obstacles appear. This chapter reminds us that every challenge becomes manageable when we break it down into pieces we can actually control. Instead of being overwhelmed by the size of a goal or the difficulty of a situation, we return to the next action, the next movement, the next small task that keeps us moving forward. The idea is almost comforting. You don't have to solve everything at once. You don't need the perfect plan or the perfect timing. You only need to show up for the piece of work in front of you. When life feels chaotic, focusing on the next task becomes a kind of anchor. It steadies your emotions and keeps your energy from scattering into fear or frustration. Big obstacles start to shrink when you handle them through steady, methodical effort. Following the process also means accepting that mastery takes repetition. There is no shortcut around doing the work. Each small action is a building block, and these blocks slowly create outcomes that once felt impossible. Even when results seem slow or invisible, the process is shaping your mind, your skill, and your resilience. As you go through your day, you can apply this lesson by choosing one concrete task and finishing it fully before moving to the next, by refusing to let the size of your ambitions paralyze you, and by trusting that steady work compounds in ways you might not see immediately. Allow yourself to focus on what is in front of you, and let the process take care of the bigger questions. With this mindset growing stronger, the next chapter opens the door to understanding what it means to do your job, and to do it well, no matter the difficulty. Chapter 12, Do Your Job, Do It Right, turns the spotlight toward responsibility. This section reminds us that obstacles often expose the gaps in our discipline, our effort, or our attention. And instead of complaining about the difficulty or waiting for ideal conditions, this chapter asks for something much simpler: focus on the duty right in front of you, and give it the respect it deserves. Every role you play in life, student, worker, creator, family member, comes with tasks that aren't always glamorous. But doing them well builds a kind of inner strength. It sharpens your sense of integrity. When you commit to doing your job with care, even the small or unnoticed parts of it, you train yourself to rise above excuses. You become someone who doesn't depend on praise or perfect circumstances to perform. There's quiet power in that. The chapter reminds us that obstacles are not an invitation to do the bare minimum. They're a test of whether you can still maintain standards when things are inconvenient or challenging. Anyone can give effort when everything is easy. What counts is being steady when things get messy. Doing your job well, even under pressure, builds a reputation with yourself. It proves that you can rely on your own consistency. Doing your job right also means removing ego from the work. You don't have to chase recognition. You don't need drama. You just need to handle what is yours to handle. When you act with this kind of clarity, you stay grounded. You waste less energy on frustration and more energy on movement. And little by little, this becomes a habit that strengthens every part of your life. As you carry this idea into your day, you can practice it by finishing tasks with care even if no one is watching, by resisting the urge to rush just to get things over with, and by reminding yourself that quality is a reflection of your character, not your circumstances. When you consistently do your job well, you build the discipline that makes obstacles less intimidating. With that foundation in place, the next chapter explores a powerful shift in mindset, trusting that what works is what matters, even if it isn't the approach you expected. Chapter 13, What's Right is What Works, explores a mindset that cuts through pride, habit, and rigid thinking. This chapter opens with a simple but transformational idea: the correct strategy is the one that brings you closer to your goal, not the one that looks impressive or feels comfortable. Obstacles often force us to reconsider how we operate, and this chapter invites you to be flexible, adaptable, and ruthlessly practical. Many people get stuck because they cling to one method, insisting that success must come a certain way. But life rarely cooperates with fixed ideas. When conditions change, insisting on old approaches only makes the obstacle stronger. Instead, the chapter encourages you to experiment, to adjust, and to use whatever tools are available. Progress belongs to those who care about results more than appearances. This way of thinking demands humility. You have to be willing to let go of ego-driven desires to seem clever, original, or superior. Sometimes the right move is the simple one, the unglamorous one, or the one you didn't plan for at all. What matters is whether it works. Obstacles become less threatening when you look for paths around them instead of insisting on going straight through by force. This chapter also highlights how creative solutions often arise from constraint. When something blocks the usual route, your mind is pushed into new territory. You start noticing combinations, strategies, and opportunities you wouldn't have considered otherwise. In this sense, obstacles don't just slow you down, they broaden your approach and sharpen your problem-solving instincts. As you carry this lesson forward, you can apply it by questioning whether you're holding onto a method simply out of pride, by choosing progress over perfection, and by staying open to alternative paths even if they weren't your first preference. Lean into what works, not what flatters the ego. When you embrace practicality over rigid thinking, obstacles turn into catalysts for new forms of action. With this perspective strengthening your momentum, the next chapter builds on the art of thinking sideways through difficulty, showing how indirect approaches can often be the smartest move of all. Chapter 14, In Praise of the Flank Attack, opens with a reminder that direct force isn't always the smartest way to overcome a challenge. When most people meet an obstacle, they instinctively push harder, trying to break through it head-on. But this chapter shows that some of the greatest victories in life come from stepping sideways, finding an unexpected angle, a hidden path, or a softer entry point that others overlook. A frontal attack often drains your energy and feeds frustration. The obstacle feels bigger, heavier, more overwhelming. But when you shift your approach, everything changes. You stop wrestling with the problem the way it wants to be fought and start choosing the method that favors you. This is how strategy replaces brute force. The chapter uses the idea of a flank to highlight adaptability. A flank attack is clever rather than stubborn. It avoids ego. It doesn't insist on proving strength. Instead, it works with timing, creativity, and awareness. When something blocks you, you ask yourself whether you have to go through it at all. Maybe you can go around it. Maybe you can approach it from a different direction. Maybe you can even use the obstacle's own shape to your advantage. This way of thinking frees you from the trap of feeling stuck. Not getting what you want immediately doesn't have to mean defeat. It simply means the straight line isn't the right line. Life rewards the person who pauses, looks around, and finds openings that others miss. Many breakthroughs come from trying something that feels unconventional, even slightly strange, but perfectly suited to the situation. As you move through your challenges, you can put this lesson into practice by stepping back when something feels immovable, by looking for alternative routes instead of repeating the same failing attempt, and by remembering that cleverness often beats strength. Let the obstacle guide you toward a smarter angle rather than forcing yourself into a losing battle. With this flexible mindset settling in, the next chapter shows how even the obstacle itself can become a tool once you understand how to redirect its energy. Chapter 15, Use Obstacles Against Themselves, explores a powerful shift in strategy. Instead of fighting the obstacle with force or frustration, you learn to redirect its weight so it begins working in your favor. The chapter frames obstacles almost like a heavy opponent pushing toward you. If you resist directly, you get exhausted. But if you angle your stance and guide that force, the pressure becomes something you can use. This idea isn't about being passive. It's about being smart. Every obstacle contains energy, difficulty, resistance, tension, delay, and most people let those forces crush them. But the moment you recognize that the difficulty itself can shape your next move, the entire situation becomes more manageable. You stop treating the obstacle as a wall and start seeing it as a tool. Sometimes the setback slows you down just enough to help you avoid rushing into a bad decision. Sometimes the frustration pushes you to look for a stronger skill or a better system. Sometimes the resistance reveals weaknesses that needed attention. The point is that obstacles aren't pure negatives. They carry lessons, pressures, and information that you can reuse instead of resenting. A key part of this mindset is emotional steadiness. When you stop reacting with anger or panic, you free up mental space to observe what the situation is offering. Maybe the delay gives you time to refine your craft. Maybe the challenge exposes a pattern in your behavior. Maybe the disadvantage forces you into creative thinking you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Using obstacles doesn't mean enjoying hardship, it means harvesting the value hidden inside it. As you move through your own challenges, you can apply this idea by treating setbacks as signals rather than punishments, by letting resistance reveal your next improvement, and by remembering that the force pushing against you can be redirected instead of fought head-on. When you use what the obstacle provides, you become stronger without wasting energy. With this ability to redirect difficulty working in your favor, the next chapter explores how to channel your own energy more intentionally, turning your inner drive into a steady source of forward motion. Chapter 16, Use Obstacles Against Themselves, opens with a simple but powerful idea. Sometimes the best way to deal with resistance is not to fight it head-on but to redirect it. Instead of pushing harder in a straight line, this chapter invites us to look at what stands in front of us with a more flexible mind. It explores how obstacles often contain the seeds of their own solution if we stop trying to overpower them and start using their own force to our advantage. This way of thinking feels a lot like emotional judo. When a situation feels too heavy to lift, instead of exhausting yourself, you let its weight work for you. You take the pressure, the friction, the inconvenience, and you turn it into momentum. Many of history's breakthroughs were born from this shift, when people stopped asking how to eliminate a difficulty and instead learned how to use it as a tool, a shortcut, or a lever. The chapter reminds us that unexpected problems can become hidden allies. A delay might become time to refine your strategy. A failure might reveal a better direction than the one you were forcing. A person blocking your path might teach you patience or adaptability. Even fear can become fuel when you approach it with curiosity instead of avoidance. Nothing is wasted when you know how to redirect energy. You can start applying this idea right away by noticing where you are pushing too hard. When frustration builds, pause instead of forcing a solution. Look for the part of the obstacle that you can transform into an advantage. Treat every resistance as raw material for progress. With this mindset, even the most stubborn barrier becomes part of your movement forward. And with that shift in thinking, we're ready to move into the next chapter, where action becomes even more strategic and deliberate. Chapter 17, Channel Your Energy, turns our attention to the power we waste without noticing. The idea at the heart of this chapter is simple: effort is not the same as progress. You can work all day, stress all night, burn through every drop of energy you have, and still move nowhere if that energy is scattered. This chapter encourages us to gather everything we feel: frustration, pressure, ambition, fear, and direct it like a focus beam instead of letting it leak in every direction. It explains that obstacles drain us most when we respond with panic or desperation. When we fight back impulsively, we burn energy without gaining ground. But when we pause, collect ourselves, and aim our effort deliberately, we become far more effective. Even small, precise actions can have enormous impact when they come from a centered mind instead of a chaotic one. The chapter paints obstacles as amplifiers. They exaggerate whatever energy we bring. If we bring fear, the obstacle grows. But if we bring calm concentration, the same obstacle becomes something we can carve through with less effort than expected. The trick is not to suppress emotion but to convert it. Anger can become determination. Anxiety can become alertness. Stress can become clarity about what truly matters. In your own life, this begins by noticing what drains you. Instead of reacting immediately, take a moment to breathe and direct your effort toward one concrete step. Focus on what actually moves the situation forward and let everything else fall away. When your energy becomes deliberate, even the toughest challenges bend to your momentum. With that clarity in mind, the next chapter will show how to take this focused energy and turn it into decisive, forward-moving advantage. Chapter 18, Seize the Offensive, shifts the tone from reacting to obstacles toward actively turning them into opportunities. Up until now, the book has explored steady movement, persistence, and the discipline of channeling energy. In this chapter, the message becomes more aggressive in the best possible way. Instead of simply defending your position against difficulties, you learn to use them as a launch pad. The chapter shows that obstacles create openings that wouldn't exist without them. A setback can force you to rethink your approach in a way that becomes a breakthrough. A blocked path might push you onto a better route you never would have considered. Difficult circumstances often expose weaknesses in others, giving you the chance to step up with strength and clarity. The chapter also reminds us that seizing the offensive doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means acting with purpose while others hesitate. When people freeze, complain, or wait for conditions to improve, you move. You take initiative. You transform uncertainty into an advantage because you are willing to act when others are stuck in analysis. This mindset becomes practical when you meet resistance and immediately ask yourself how you can use it to create momentum. Sometimes that means innovating faster. Other times it means showing more resilience or taking on responsibility others avoid. Forward motion becomes your signature response to difficulty. To apply this in your own life, look for situations where everyone else is waiting and choose to be the one who moves. Turn frustration into action. Turn confusion into clarity by taking the first step. When you train yourself to see every disruption as a trigger to take the lead, obstacles no longer slow you, they become the reason you advance. With that spirit of initiative, we can now move into the final chapter of action, where the book helps us prepare for the possibility that even our best strategies may not work as expected. Chapter 19, Prepare for None of It to Work, takes a sharp but necessary turn. After spending so much time learning how to move, persist, adapt, and strike with purpose, this chapter asks us to face an uncomfortable truth: even our smartest strategies might fail. Not because we were wrong or lazy, but because life is unpredictable. The lesson here is not pessimism, it's emotional readiness. The chapter urges us to act with full force while holding no illusions about guaranteed results. When we expect that every effort should unfold perfectly, we set ourselves up for frustration and bitterness. But when we accept ahead of time that some battles will not bend to our will, we become unbreakable. We act with strength while staying free from desperation. This mindset makes action cleaner and more honest. It frees you from needing a specific outcome in order to keep going. You move because movement is right, not because success is owed to you. You work because work itself is part of your character, not because the world must reward you on your schedule. This is how people stay steady when others fall apart. In practical terms, this means giving your best without clinging to the result. It means preparing for setbacks before they arrive so you're not shocked when reality pushes back. It means having the humility to know that even perfect execution does not guarantee victory. And yet you still act fully, decisively, courageously. When you can hold both truths at once, working with total commitment while accepting the possibility of failure, you gain a powerful kind of freedom. And this freedom is the bridge into the next part of the book, where the focus shifts from outer action to the inner strength that carries us through the long road ahead. Chapter 20 opens with the idea that life rarely hands us perfect moments to act, so waiting becomes its own trap. This chapter explores how obstacles can do more than block your path, they can give you the opening you were blind to before. Instead of freezing when the world throws something inconvenient or painful at you, the author invites us to flip the situation, to turn the pressure into momentum, and to step into the role of someone who uses difficulty as fuel. It's the mindset of not just dealing with circumstances but taking charge of them. As the chapter unfolds, you see that the people who rise above their challenges often do something counterintuitive. They stop treating setbacks as warnings to retreat and start treating them as invitations to move forward. When something disrupts our plan, our instinct is usually to protect ourselves, to pull back, to wait for a safer opening. But that instinct often leaves us stuck in hesitation. There is another way. You can turn the unexpected into leverage. The same event that scares you can also scare the problem itself. It gives you a moment where your opponents, your competition, or even your own internal doubts are off balance. If you move decisively in that window, you turn defense into offense. This shift doesn't require aggression or impulse. It is more like recognizing a natural rhythm in the chaos. When everything seems to be breaking, something unusual happens, openings appear that never would have existed in calm times. The world becomes flexible. Systems crack. People hesitate. You step into action at the moment most people are stepping away, and that difference becomes power. The chapter also hints at a subtle truth about courage. Courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the willingness to keep moving when conditions feel unfair or unpredictable. That movement itself becomes a signal, to yourself and to the situation, that you refuse to be shaped by fear. And once you take even a single step with that intention, you begin changing the environment around you. Opportunities become visible that were hidden a moment earlier. What looked like a dead end can transform into a shortcut, but only after you step into the unknown. This is the deeper message: obstacles contain energy. They push, and that pressure can either crush you or propel you, depending on how you redirect it. If you can use the stress of a hard moment to sharpen your awareness and strengthen your resolve, the obstacle becomes a launch point. The very situation that was meant to slow you down becomes the reason you accelerate. This is what it means to seize the offensive, not to fight blindly, but to transform every unwelcome moment into a chance to move with intention and create progress where none seemed possible. As you finish this chapter, the idea becomes very practical. When something unexpected disrupts your plan, start by grounding yourself, noticing where the fear or frustration is tightening your decisions. Then place one deliberate action in front of you. Make the phone call you've been avoiding, try the alternative method you skipped before, or take a small step that asserts you still have influence over the situation. Let that single action build momentum, and keep using each difficulty as a chance to shift from reaction into choice. The obstacle won't control the direction anymore, you will. And with that spirit of turning pressure into power, the path leads naturally into the next chapter, where the energy you've built becomes even more important. Chapter 21, Prepare for None of It to Work, begins with a surprisingly honest idea. Even if you plan well, act boldly, and stay persistent, there will be times when things simply refuse to move. This chapter is about facing that possibility without breaking your spirit. Instead of assuming that effort guarantees a reward, it encourages you to build the kind of mindset that keeps going even when the world doesn't give you the outcome you hoped for. It is a quiet but powerful discipline, the ability to work without clinging to the expectation of success. As the message unfolds, it becomes clear that this is not pessimism. It is strength. When you accept that the world can ignore your hard work, you also free yourself from the fear of disappointment. You stop acting only when results look promising and start acting because the work itself is in your control. This is how people become unstoppable. They show up because showing up is who they are, not because circumstances guarantee a win. The chapter invites you to detach from the idea that life owes you something for your effort. It owes nothing. You act anyway. There is a strange kind of peace in this mindset. When you know that your plan may fall apart, you begin to treat every step as practice rather than as a desperate attempt to reach a perfect outcome. You become more flexible. You adapt more quickly. Failure stops feeling like a personal insult and becomes part of the landscape you're ready to navigate. You prepare emotionally for resistance, for delays, for unfair blows. And because you expect these possibilities, they lose their power to shock you. You remain steady where others fall apart. The chapter also highlights an important paradox. Being prepared for things not to work actually increases your chances of succeeding. When people cling to a single fragile plan, they crumble when it collapses. But someone who has already accepted uncertainty stays calm and keeps adjusting. They try again. They pivot. They survive the blow that knocks others out. This is how resilience works, not through blind hope, but through the willingness to continue even when the world doesn't cooperate. And in the middle of this steady realism, there's a deeper lesson about identity. You learn to measure yourself not by what you achieve, but by what you attempt. By your consistency. By your character. When you're no longer chained to outcomes, your courage becomes cleaner. Your actions become more intentional. Your energy becomes less fragile. Success stops being something you chase and becomes a natural result of who you are becoming. As the chapter draws to a close, the practical steps are quietly simple. Begin by reminding yourself that effort does not guarantee triumph. Accept that fully. Then act with your whole heart anyway. If something fails, adjust instead of retreating. Treat setbacks as information rather than judgment. Let every obstacle teach you how to stay centered even when progress is slow or invisible. This kind of patience gives you the ability to outlast situations that defeat most people. With this foundation of calm endurance, you're ready to move into the next part of the book, where the focus shifts from action to the deeper strength that carries you through the long, uncertain journey ahead. Chapter 22 The Discipline of the Will opens with the idea that no matter how strong your actions are, there comes a point where effort alone can't shape the world the way you want. This chapter introduces the discipline of the will, the inner strength that lets you endure storms you cannot avoid, adapt to realities you cannot control, and remain grounded when everything outside is uncertain. It's the kind of power that doesn't push the world around, but lets you stand unshaken in the middle of it. From the beginning, the message feels different from earlier parts of the book. Action is external, will is internal. Action deals with what you can change, will deals with what you must face. The chapter suggests that real strength is not just about how hard you fight, but also about how deeply you can accept difficulty without collapsing. It's the art of bending without breaking, of adjusting without losing yourself. As the narration unfolds, you see that will is not about pretending to be fearless or pretending life is easy. It is about building a calm center inside yourself, a place where fear, frustration, and disappointment cannot fully reach. You develop the ability to observe what's happening, even when you dislike it, and still choose your response. This inner discipline is what allows people to remain steady in situations that overwhelm others. One of the subtle insights of the chapter is that will grows slowly, almost invisibly. It's shaped by how you handle daily inconveniences, unexpected losses, and long stretches of uncertainty. Every time you choose patience over panic, or clarity over emotional chaos, you train this inner muscle. Over time, it becomes your anchor. It keeps you balanced when life throws something heavier than usual. Another important part of this chapter is the idea that will is not passive. It doesn't mean standing still and letting life crush you. It means cooperating with reality, understanding the limits of force, and redirecting your energy toward what can still be influenced. When the situation is immovable, will helps you shift your focus to endurance, adaptation, and meaning. This is where resilience is born, not from avoiding hardship, but from meeting it with perspective. The chapter also hints that will isn't something you use only in extreme crises. It's a lifelong companion, especially during long seasons of uncertainty, illness, financial difficulty, personal loss, or dreams that take longer than expected. Without will, the long road drains you. With it, you become capable of lasting through circumstances that would otherwise break your confidence. Near the end, the message becomes quietly empowering. You don't need control over everything to move forward. You only need control over yourself. Once you focus on what remains within your reach, your attitude, your choices, your interpretation of events, you stop feeling powerless. You might not be able to choose the situation you're in, but you can always choose how you carry yourself through it. As this chapter closes, you're invited to practice this discipline in small ways. When something tests your patience, let it become an opportunity to strengthen your calm. When uncertainty appears, breathe before reacting. When disappointment hits, remind yourself that you can withstand more than you think. These small patterns build a deep resilience that carries you across the hardest parts of life. With that foundation of quiet strength, we step into the next chapter, where this inner fortress begins to take shape more clearly. Chapter 23, Build Your Inner Citadel, begins by exploring a powerful metaphor, the idea that every person needs a strong inner fortress, a place within themselves that cannot be shaken by chaos, by loss, or by the unpredictability of life. This chapter is about building that inner citadel, the mental and emotional strength that protects you when the world outside stops cooperating. It's a reminder that the strongest walls are not made of stone but of character, clarity, and self-mastery. As the chapter unfolds, you see that the inner citadel isn't built during peaceful times. It grows from the moments when life forces you to confront discomfort. Every difficulty you survive becomes another stone in the wall. Every disappointment you endure with patience becomes another layer of reinforcement. The chapter suggests that you don't become resilient by avoiding hardship, you become resilient by meeting hardship with intentional growth. There's a quiet honesty in the way this idea develops. The world will always bring events you didn't choose. Illness, loss, unfair situations, sudden setbacks, these things are woven into the fabric of being human. You can't prevent them, but you can prepare yourself to meet them with strength instead of despair. The inner citadel becomes a storehouse of endurance, a reserve of calm you can lean on when external stability disappears. The chapter also hints at another layer of growth. When you build inner strength, you start to depend less on people's approval, on perfect plans, or on circumstances behaving nicely. You begin to trust yourself more deeply. You stop needing the world to be easy in order to feel grounded. That independence gives you freedom. It lets you navigate uncertainty with a steadier heart. What makes this chapter meaningful is how practical it feels. The inner citadel is not a distant philosophical idea, it's a skill you build over time. You strengthen it every time you remain patient when things don't go your way. You strengthen it when you choose restraint instead of impulsive reaction. You strengthen it when you keep going even on days you feel tired or discouraged. These small choices eventually combine into a powerful inner stability. Toward the end, the chapter emphasizes that this fortress isn't built for pride. It's built for survival. It's what allows you to stay upright when stress tries to bend you, and what helps you maintain dignity even when life feels unfair. When you have this kind of inner foundation, obstacles lose much of their power. They can still challenge you, but they cannot define you. As you close this chapter, the practical lesson becomes clear. Begin cultivating resilience in small moments, when a plan gets disrupted, when someone disappoints you, when progress feels slow. Let every discomfort make you stronger rather than smaller. Let every challenge add a new layer to your calm. Over time, you'll find yourself carrying a quiet strength that stays with you in every season. With this growing inner foundation, the story naturally leads into the next chapter, where preparation takes a darker but necessary form. Chapter 24, Anticipation, Thinking Negatively, opens with a mindset that might seem unusual at first, the practice of imagining what could go wrong. Not as a way to invite fear or negativity, but as a way to strengthen yourself before life has a chance to surprise you. This chapter explains how clear anticipation, especially of the difficult parts, can protect you from panic, disappointment, and emotional collapse when events don't unfold the way you hoped. It's a reminder that the world is unpredictable, and the mind is stronger when it prepares for that unpredictability. As the idea unfolds, the chapter contrasts two ways of thinking. One way is wishful optimism, hoping everything works out smoothly. The other is grounded awareness, acknowledging that problems, delays, and setbacks are natural parts of any journey. When you expect everything to be easy, even small obstacles feel like disasters. But when you expect challenges, they lose their power to shock you. You meet them with calm instead of crisis. The message becomes clearer as the narration continues. Thinking negatively doesn't mean expecting failure or giving up. It means recognizing that life will test you and mentally rehearsing how you will respond when it does. You picture the frustrations, the unfair moments, the complicated emotions, and you prepare yourself to face them with steadiness. This preparation becomes a shield. It prevents you from being emotionally overwhelmed when reality doesn't match your hopes. There is something deeply empowering about this approach. Instead of walking through life fragile and easily rattled, you become someone who is hard to unsettle. When you've already considered the worst-case scenarios, you stop living in constant fear of them. You know you can endure them if they appear. Suddenly challenges feel smaller because your mind has already made peace with their possibility. The chapter also highlights that this kind of preparation builds confidence. Real confidence is not pretending everything will go perfectly, but knowing you can handle things even when they don't. It's the quiet stability of someone who has rehearsed their response to difficulty and no longer panics at the first sign of trouble. Obstacles become less like walls and more like expected terrain on a long journey. Near the end, the chapter reminds you that this mental preparation is a daily habit. You strengthen it when you pause before starting something important and imagine the potential disruptions. You strengthen it when you ask yourself what you'll do if things take longer, if people disagree, if emotions flare up, or if the outcome isn't what you imagined. Instead of being caught off guard, you move forward ready for anything. As this chapter closes, the takeaway becomes simple. Start your plans with clear eyes. Expect resistance. Anticipate delays. Prepare yourself emotionally for the possibility that things won't unfold the way you want. That awareness doesn't weaken you, it arms you. When life throws something unexpected at you, you won't fall apart. You'll respond with a calm you've already practiced. With this grounded perspective, you're ready to step into the next chapter, where acceptance becomes the next layer of strength. Chapter 25, The Art of Acquiescence, begins with a message that feels soft on the surface but carries a deep strength underneath. There are moments when the most powerful response you can make is acceptance. Not the kind of acceptance that comes from giving up, but the acceptance that comes from seeing reality clearly and refusing to waste energy fighting what cannot be changed. This chapter explores the art of acquiescence, the ability to stop resisting the inevitable and instead work with it in a calm, deliberate way. As the chapter unfolds, you begin to understand that acceptance is not weakness. It's clarity. It's the skill of recognizing when a situation is outside your control and shifting your energy away from anger or denial. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to bend the world to your expectations, you adapt to what is actually happening. You stop wrestling with the unchangeable. That simple shift frees your mind, eases your emotional weight, and gives you a chance to respond thoughtfully. There's a gentle but firm truth running through this message. Life will often bring events that you would never choose. People will disappoint you, plans will unravel, circumstances will shift suddenly. If your only response is resistance, this shouldn't be happening, this isn't fair, you trap yourself in frustration. But when you practice acceptance, you stop adding unnecessary suffering on top of what already hurts. You conserve your strength for the parts of the situation that still can be influenced. The chapter also touches on humility. Acceptance requires letting go of the illusion that we can control everything. It asks you to admit that the world doesn't always follow your schedule or your vision. That honesty is freeing. When you stop demanding that life behave a certain way, you start noticing the opportunities that exist within the situation as it is. Many people miss those openings because they are too busy fighting the unfairness of the moment. Acceptance brings your attention back to reality, where real solutions live. There is also a quiet lesson about emotional maturity. Accepting the inevitable doesn't mean you don't feel pain or disappointment. It means you don't let those emotions decide your actions. You let reality be what it is, and you choose your next step from a place of stability rather than resistance. This ability turns chaos into something manageable. Instead of drowning in what you cannot change, you stay afloat by focusing on your response. Toward the end, the chapter gently encourages you to practice acceptance in everyday moments. When someone behaves differently than you hoped, when a plan collapses, when the world shows you a limit you didn't expect, pause and let the truth land. Then breathe. Let the frustration soften. Once your mind quiets, choose the next small action that fits the situation instead of the version you wish were happening. That is how acceptance becomes strength. As this chapter closes, the path ahead becomes clearer. When you stop resisting reality, you create space for a deeper form of resilience, one that transforms hardship into meaning. And that leads directly into the next chapter, where love for every part of life, even the hard parts, becomes the ultimate expression of strength. Chapter 26, Love Everything That Happens at Amor Fati, begins with one of the most powerful and surprising ideas in Stoic philosophy, the practice of embracing everything life brings, even the parts that feel harsh or unwanted. This chapter introduces the concept of amor fati, love of fate. At first, the idea sounds impossible. How can anyone love difficulty, loss, uncertainty, or pain? But the deeper meaning is not about enjoying suffering. It is about developing a mindset that sees every event as fuel for growth, every setback as something you can use, and every moment, even the hard ones, as essential to your path. As the message unfolds, you sense that this chapter is pushing beyond acceptance. Acceptance lets you endure what happens. Amor Fati invites you to lean into it, to welcome challenges as teachers, to see obstacles as opportunities shaped specifically for your development. Instead of asking why something happened to you, this mindset asks how you can transform it into strength. It's the art of turning your entire life, every twist, every delay, every disappointment, into material for progress. The narration continues with a gentle honesty. Life will never protect you from difficulty. But Amor Fati teaches that difficulty isn't a sign that things are going wrong. It's a sign that you're alive, learning, and being shaped by experience. People who adopt this approach stop feeling cursed by obstacles. They stop labeling moments as good or bad. They start seeing everything as useful, everything as part of a larger story that might make sense later, even if it feels painful now. There's a unique kind of strength in this perspective. When you stop fighting reality and start cooperating with it, you become impossible to defeat. You become someone who uses setbacks as stepping stones instead of letting them be stopping points. You no longer collapse at the first sign of difficulty because difficulty is no longer your enemy. It becomes part of your process. The chapter also reveals something profound about inner freedom. When you love everything that happens, you stop being controlled by the fear of what might happen. You move through life lighter, more flexible, more open. Even unexpected problems lose their power to paralyze you because you trust that you can use them. This is not blind optimism. It's a trained ability to turn every moment into momentum. Toward the end, the message becomes deeply practical. You don't need to instantly love painful experiences. You start small. When your plan changes, instead of feeling defeated, tell yourself there may be something valuable hidden in the new direction. When a struggle appears, imagine that this struggle is shaping a stronger version of you. When something hurts, look at the strength you're building through the endurance itself. Over time, this mindset turns life into a partner instead of an opponent. As the chapter closes, you carry forward the sense that life becomes lighter when you stop resisting its shape. With Amor Fati, every moment becomes usable. Every challenge becomes training. And with that mindset growing inside you, the next chapter naturally deepens your long-term endurance and prepares you to walk forward with steady resilience. Chapter 27, Perseverance opens with the reminder that real progress is rarely fast or smooth. This chapter explores perseverance, the steady, quiet force that keeps you moving long after the excitement fades, after motivation dips, and after the world stops applauding your effort. It's the lesson that obstacles aren't defeated by bursts of energy but by endurance, by the willingness to keep showing up even when the results are slow or invisible. As the idea unfolds, the chapter makes something clear. Perseverance is not dramatic. It's not heroic in the way movies make struggle look heroic. Most of the time, it's unglamorous. It's waking up day after day and pushing forward even when you're tired. It's doing the work without a guarantee of immediate reward. It's choosing to continue when giving up would be easier. This kind of persistence becomes a quiet strength that outlasts obstacles simply because it refuses to stop. There's a gentle honesty in the way the narrative develops. People often quit not because they're incapable, but because they underestimate how long things take. They imagine progress happening quickly, and when it doesn't, they lose faith. But the chapter invites you to see challenges differently. Obstacles aren't signs you're on the wrong path, they are part of the path. They slow you down, they test your patience, and they force you to stretch your limits. Through that process, you develop endurance that becomes invaluable later. As the chapter deepens, you see that perseverance is built through repetition. Every time you choose to continue after a setback, you strengthen your ability to endure future setbacks. Every time you push through boredom, frustration, or doubt, you sharpen your resilience. Over time, steady effort compounds in the same way savings grow in a bank account, slow at first, then powerful. This is how people achieve long-term goals, not through rare moments of inspiration, but through consistent dedication. Another insight that emerges is that perseverance isn't stubbornness. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about adjusting your approach while keeping your direction. If one method fails, you try another. If progress slows, you keep moving at whatever pace you can manage. Perseverance is flexible. It adapts. It refuses to stop learning. This adaptability is what makes perseverance sustainable rather than exhausting. Toward the end, the message becomes deeply practical. Long journeys require pacing. You protect your energy. You celebrate small wins. You allow yourself to rest without quitting. You remind yourself that every step forward, even a slow one, builds momentum. You recognize that the path may twist, stall, or challenge you, but you choose to keep walking anyway. That choice becomes your greatest advantage over time. As this chapter closes, you carry forward the understanding that perseverance turns obstacles into stepping stones simply by outlasting them. With this endurance growing inside you, the next chapter expands your sense of purpose, pointing you toward something larger than your individual struggle. Chapter 28, Something Bigger Than Yourself, opens by widening the lens beyond personal ambition. This chapter is about discovering that your strength grows dramatically when your life is anchored to something larger than your own comfort, success, or reputation. It could be a mission, a principle, a community, a belief, anything that expands your sense of responsibility beyond your individual desires. When you commit to something bigger than yourself, obstacles stop feeling like personal attacks and start becoming challenges you face on behalf of something meaningful. As the message unfolds, you begin to feel the shift in perspective. When your goal is only about you, frustration hits harder. Every setback feels like a threat to your identity. But when your purpose extends beyond your own ego, you gain resilience. You endure more. You complain less. You're willing to sacrifice convenience or comfort because the work matters. This mindset is what allows people throughout history to withstand unbelievable pressure. They weren't just working for themselves. They were carrying something larger. There is a quiet strength woven through this chapter. It points out that when your purpose is tied to external validation, you become fragile. But when your purpose is tied to values or service, you become grounded. You stop being controlled by fear of failure or desire for praise, because the mission is worth the struggle. Obstacles lose their power to discourage you. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "How can I use this to stay loyal to what I believe in?" As the chapter continues, you see that this sense of higher purpose also gives you direction. It simplifies decisions. When you know what you stand for, you know how to act, even in chaos. You stop drifting. You stop overthinking. You move with clarity because you're not chasing comfort, you're chasing meaning. The result is not just resilience, but dignity. You feel connected to something that remains steady even when your circumstances are unstable. Another subtle but powerful insight in this chapter is that purpose humbles you. When the work is not about you, you complain less and contribute more. You take criticism less personally. You find strength in serving rather than in being recognized. This humility becomes armor against emotional turmoil. It keeps you balanced when the journey becomes long or uncertain. Toward the end, the message becomes tender and practical. You don't need to find a grand, dramatic purpose. Start with something simple yet genuine. Maybe it's the desire to support your family, to protect your health, to improve your community, or to live in a way that reflects your values. Let that bigger reason guide you on days when motivation feels weak. Remember that you're not just pushing through obstacles for yourself. You're doing it for something that matters beyond your immediate feelings. As this chapter closes, the path ahead becomes more meaningful. When your struggle is tied to a deeper cause, perseverance becomes natural. And with that foundation, you're ready to face the next chapter, where the fragility and beauty of life deepen your appreciation for the present moment. Chapter 29, Meditate on Your Mortality, begins with one of the most grounding and humbling ideas in all of philosophy, remembering that life is temporary. This chapter explores how the awareness of mortality, instead of frightening us, can sharpen our clarity, deepen our gratitude, and transform the way we handle obstacles. When you keep the truth of your limited time close, the noise of daily stress starts to fade. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter, and you begin living with a sharper sense of purpose. As the chapter unfolds, the message becomes both honest and liberating. Thinking about death is not meant to darken your days, it's meant to brighten them. When you realize that every moment could be your last, you stop delaying growth. You stop putting your dreams on hold. You stop letting small frustrations consume you. Suddenly, the things that once felt unbearable lose their grip. You become more patient, more present, more intentional, because you understand the fragile nature of time. The narration continues with a gentle reminder that many obstacles feel huge only because we forget how short life really is. Arguments, ego battles, grudges, fears, and petty worries seem important until you imagine looking back on them from the end of your life. That perspective shrinks them instantly. What remains important are the things that carry meaning, how you lived, what you created, who you helped, and the way you treated the people around you. There is a strange but beautiful strength in this awareness. When you meditate on mortality, you become less afraid of failure. You become less controlled by judgment. You begin to act with courage simply because you understand that time is slipping, and you don't want to waste it living small. Obstacles stop being insults and become challenges that shape your character. You meet them with clarity instead of panic. The chapter also invites you to notice how temporary everything is, your struggles, your successes, your fears, even your identity as it changes over the years. This reminder doesn't make life bleak, it makes it meaningful. When you know things won't last forever, you appreciate them more deeply. Hard moments become easier to bear because you know they will pass. Good moments become sweeter because you know they are gifts. As the chapter nears its end, the practical message becomes simple and powerful. Take a moment each day to acknowledge that your time is limited. Let that truth guide your choices. Let it push you to stop waiting for perfect conditions. Let it soften your anger, speed up your forgiveness, and deepen your focus. When you remember that life is finite, you naturally begin to live with more intention, with more courage, and with more honesty. And with this clarity about the fragility of life, the next chapter leads you to a place where endings become beginnings, and where you learn to rise again no matter how many times the world asks you to start over. Chapter 30, Prepare to Start Again, opens with a mindset that feels both humbling and empowering. No matter how far you've come, life will eventually ask you to begin again. This chapter explores the idea that progress is not a straight line and victory is never permanent. Just when you think you've mastered something, life changes the terrain. Just when things start flowing smoothly, a new challenge appears. Instead of fearing these resets, the chapter encourages you to treat them as natural parts of growth. As the message unfolds, the chapter reveals an important truth. Many people break down not because of one single obstacle, but because they expected the journey to end once they succeeded. They assumed that after one breakthrough, things would stabilize forever. But life doesn't work that way. Life is a cycle of learning, adjusting, falling, and rising again. When you expect that rhythm, you stop taking setbacks personally and start seeing them as invitations to evolve. There is a gentle and honest tone throughout this chapter. It explains that beginnings aren't signs of failure, they're signs of movement. Every new start means you've outgrown an old stage. It means you're ready to enter a new chapter of your life, even if the transition feels uncomfortable. This mindset allows you to face fresh obstacles with maturity instead of frustration. You become someone who doesn't cling to old victories or old identities, but someone who adapts fluidly to whatever comes next. The narration continues with a quiet strength. Starting again demands patience. It demands humility. It requires letting go of the belief that progress should always feel linear. But once you embrace that expectation, you develop a long-term endurance that outlasts disappointment. You stop expecting permanence in a world that constantly shifts. You learn to reset your focus, re-engage your effort, and stay committed to the path even when the path takes a surprising turn. The chapter also hints at a final, deeper insight. Every new beginning gives you the chance to practice everything you've learned. When you're forced to start again, you get to bring your improved perception, your sharpened discipline, and your strengthened will into the next phase. The reset becomes a test of how much you've grown, not a punishment. You move forward wiser, steadier, and more prepared than before. Toward the end, the chapter grows tender and practical. When life resets your plans, pause and breathe. Accept the new beginning without resentment. Bring your full presence to the first step, even if it feels small. Trust that endurance matters more than speed. Trust that the skills you've built will guide you. Start again, patiently, honestly, and with the understanding that progress is a lifelong process, not a single milestone. As the book comes to its close, this final message becomes the thread that ties everything together. Obstacles do not end your journey, they reshape it. You will meet them again and again, but each time, you will meet them stronger. And with that mindset, the story doesn't end, it simply prepares you for the next beginning.
What's good? Welcome to the Literary Listening Channel. Got the classics on the audio, we flip the public page, summarize the self-help gurus and their modern age. And we go chapter by chapter through the greatest novels now. So hit subscribe to Literary Listening. Yeah, hit subscribe to Literary Listening. Be a part of the community that we are building. Subscribe to Literary Listening.